Hey, my name's TC Burr. Welcome to Yet, a podcast created to encourage you to get your goal or idea out of your head and into reality. On this podcast, you'll hear stories, encouragements, tips, and ideas to help you write your book, start your business, launch your podcast, or whatever it is you hope to accomplish. Because it's not that you haven't done it, it's just that you haven't done it yet. My guest today is Carmen Norris. Carmen, how you doing?
Pretty good. Thank you for having me.
Well, I am so glad that you decided to join the show. Typically, what I like to do on this show is I like to invite my guests to introduce themselves and kind of do their own little bios. So if you don't mind, I'd love for you to share just 30 seconds or less. Tell folks a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Well, thank you. Hi y'all. I am Carmen Norris. I'm originally from Atlanta, born and raised there, and now I am officially a Texas girl. I've been here about I think 7 or so years so far, so I feel like it's been long enough for me to say that. I've loved storytelling and stories pretty much my entire life and always knew that whatever I did as an adult would have something to do with writing. So I finally start seeing that come to fruition in fiction when I put out my debut novel, The Offer. It came out in this past July, so just a few months now, and it is on Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, and it is about 3 friends that have to work for a kidnapper after they have been accused of blackmail.
Oh, wow. Sounds like a lot of dramas. That's awesome. So, well, congratulations on releasing your book. That's amazing. You said this has kind of always been something that you've had kind of you've always been writing in some degree or another, pretty much your whole life. When did you decide to actually start writing fiction and kind of moving toward publishing?
So I would say it started when I was a kid. When I was a little girl, I remember me and my cousins would get together, we'd write songs. And then I got into high school and I was like, oh, beyond that, I write poetry, which is kind of the same. And then
Yeah.
I would say towards like senior year on, I started trying to write novels and I went to school for writing and I was doing it there. And I spent, I would say, most of my 20s trying to chase after like a publishing deal, trying to get an agent or get with a publisher. And I'm 35 now. Just to put it into perspective. But a couple years ago, I think it was when I was like, you know what? I just want to put my stories out there.
Mm.
And so for the longest, I had this idea that it had to be like the trap pup route. And I was like, that's not working for me. And I just want my stories in the real. So I was like, man, I have something I've been wanting, The Offer. I wanted that to be my debut. I'd written other stories, but I was like, no, this is the one. So then I just ended up self-publishing and it just kind of came about that way.
That's amazing. So I'm curious. So you mentioned that you've written many stories, but you knew that The Offer was the one that you wanted to release first. What is it about that particular work that just had you convinced that this is the one to kind of lead things off?
For me, I feel like it was, even though there are, no stories, the most original, right? Like every story's been told a million times before. But I felt like for me, it was something that I couldn't find a lot, especially like when I would look up like kidnapping tropes. It usually falls into like romance or, you know what I
Mm,
mean? She falls
yeah.
in love with her captor. And I'm like, or if it's like with, in thrillers, it's like, oh, son was kidnapped and she'll do anything to go after him. And I was like, I wanted something where it was a little bit more complicated than that. And I've seen other stories like it, but I was like, it's not enough. So I was like, this is how I'm going to make my mark and say, this is the type of story I write.
That's awesome. So, okay, so you recently released just a few months ago, it sounds like. What was some of the, I guess maybe the biggest challenges leading up to that? And, or maybe what are some of the biggest surprises that you experienced along that journey?
Biggest challenges, I would say, I was laid off from my job about a little under a year before release.
Okay.
And at my previous job, I was making really good money. And it was one of those things where it's like, you kind of don't, I wasn't thinking about the cost of it. You know what I mean? I wasn't thinking truly about like how much an editor really costs and how much a good
Yeah.
book cover really costs. And so I was like, whatever it is, I'll just take care of it. And then I lost it and I was like, whoa, I really gotta think this through. So really just having to be, and I feel like it was something I should have been doing before and I just wasn't, but being really cognizant of here's all it takes, not just as far as the work you put in, but like financially and the resources, and making
Hmm.
sure that you're not just taking the cheapest thing because it's the cheapest, but like what's like true quality and like what's to market and all of this. I think for me that was like a biggest challenge. And since then, and even, before then, but really since it's been out, marketing. I worked in marketing and still it's just like everything that worked before, doesn't seem to work now. What worked like for someone doing something similar doesn't work for you. So figuring out what my thing is and like where I do well in that with promoting it.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I'm curious to hear about you as a writer, and I ask a lot of my writer guests this. Are there any kind of like tried and true processes that you use or tools that you kind of really lean on? Are you, for example, like you could answer this, are you kind of an early morning writer, a late night writer? Do you have like specific like hacks or things that kind of help you stay organized and stay focused and stay on track as a writer? I'd love to hear you just kind of wherever you want to go with that, but I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I am definitely a night owl. So I have like on my dresser next to my bed, like I call it like my little writing corner, because I am one of those people that will just be up at like 11 p.m., should be dead asleep. And I'm like, man, it would be like a really good idea. And I have like three notebooks that are just for story ideas, and these little pins that like when you click it twice, it lights up. Cause I've had the problem before while I'll write at night and I can't see that I'm writing over something
Oh,
I've
right.
already written. So now I
Right.
need to be able to like have that visualization. So really that's I feel like a big part of it. And then after that, once I'm past like I'll use like the notes app in my phone and I will just come out like kind of brain dump basically every single
Hmm.
idea. Once I'm past that, I find a specific notebook for that one story, and then I do kind of like a mini, like a zero draft slash outline in that, and then it goes in the scrivener. So I have like this very particular process for how it goes.
Okay. And is the notebook that you use for the kind of draft zero, is that the same notebook that's on your like bedside table, or are those different? Those
Two
are
different
different notebooks.
ones.
Okay.
So
Okay.
the one on my bedside is just for anything that kind of comes at me in the night and I don't want to like pull my phone out. And the other one's like per story.
Gotcha. But it sounds like the important thing is like you are always seems like you always are ready to capture those ideas when they come. I think that's
Yeah.
so important because, I've learned from experience that if you don't, they'll show up, and then if you don't grab them, a lot of times they'll be gone. So I
Oh
love
yeah.
that. I love that. Okay, cool. So one of the things that I talk a lot about on this show, in fact, one of the main reasons I started this podcast is because I want to provide encouragement for writers and creatives and business owners who are kind of just getting started. And so I'm curious, because I think that encouragement is one of the biggest needs for anybody who's taking on something big like writing a book, because you're going to run into challenges and things are going to get hard. And if you don't have kind of people who can cheer you on, or folks kind of in your corner, I think it's sometimes the pressure and the obstacles can be too much. But I think encouragement is a critical piece of a writing journey. So I'm curious, from your perspective, is there a moment that you would point back to in your journey? Maybe it's in a conversation or something someone's done for you, where you would look at it and say, "Man, that was a super encouraging moment or super encouraging word that someone offered." I'm curious, do you have an example that you might be willing to share?
So for me, it hasn't been like one moment. I mean, there's been a lot. It's always like for me, like a bunch of little things. It
Yeah.
can be like when I had like those pens that are like on my bedside table that light up. My husband got me those once and he was like, "Oh, I noticed you keep having the same issues. Like I thought this would be like a nice gesture." And to
Yeah.
him, it was just
Yeah.
kind of like, "Oh, here you go." It meant so much to me. You know what I mean? It was so thoughtful and so supportive. So there's a lot of like small things like that. And for me, I feel like I'm one of those people that it's like the negative will get to me and I will think about that so much more. So what I did is I actually started a Pinterest board for myself. And anytime somebody like compliments my writing or says something encouraging, like I'll like write that down and take a picture of it and put that in my board. And then whenever I'm like feeling down or negativity is getting to me, I go through all these different instances of like all the positive. And I just kind of collect all of these small moments like that.
I love that. I love that. And this is not for this Pinterest board is not for anyone else to see. This is just
Mm-mm.
really for you to
Yeah,
go
it's
and
a
kind of
private board. Yeah.
remind yourself. I love that. I love that. That's so cool. That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. So what, let's see. Okay. So again, this is for the listeners of the show are generally going to be people who are either thinking about writing a book or maybe they're just getting started. So as you think about kind of your journey, the things that you've learned, what kind of advice or encouragement would you give to someone who is brand new and maybe kind of struggling with self-doubt or imposter syndrome or feeling like, I could never do this, it's just too much? Like what advice or encouragement would you give to someone who's in that situation?
Say for one, like take your time. Like I know it's like, man, if I'd have started, because I get that way. Like if I'd have just started just a little bit sooner, you know how far I'd be right now. But
Hmm.
okay, you didn't. We're here today. This is when you start. Give yourself a minute to, for one, just really work on the craft of it. Reading a lot, reading, in your genre, reading craft books, whatever that looks like for you, and just kind of working on, putting together the best story you can, and also along the way learning from other people. Get into different like reader groups or talk to other authors near you. They don't have to be like the Stephen Kings of the world. It can be the guy that also writes his novel on the coffee shop next to you each weekend.
Hmm.
Just anybody else that kind of has that experience that's along the same journey, and just keep learning. Like even if you're doing this 30 years later, just keep learning. That's all it's going to be, and just give yourself some grace.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that's so important. And I think for a lot of us, especially like the way that the world is now, where everybody's on social media and everyone's connected and everyone's hustling and like grinding and doing their thing, it's easy to look at that and think, man, I'm so far behind. But like, I think one of the risks of that and one of the dangers of that, at least from my perspective, is you can get sucked into all of that and kind of miss out on the journey and the art of writing. And to me, that's the whole point, is like creating something amazing and going on this journey. And you'll get to the destination when you're supposed to get there. And it might be a different destination than you thought when you first set out. But like, I love that idea of just kind of slow down, take your time, give yourself grace. That's huge. And I couldn't agree more. That's amazing. So kind of related to that, have you um a couple questions that kind of spawned from that. So first, have you struggled any with kind of some of those self-doubt, imposter syndrome, like feeling like your stuff isn't good enough? I'm curious if you'd share a little bit about kind of your journey there, or maybe that hasn't been a problem for you, but I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, definitely. When I was working on putting on like writing the author, it took me several years of like, write this draft, okay, put it away, and then come back to it, and then put it away, and then come back to it. And it was purely imposter syndrome. It
Mm,
was like a lot of these I can't even honestly call drafts. It was really just, okay, let me change this scene. And I can't find anything else, but I was like, it's not quite good enough. It's not quite there. And I mean, years of this just going back and forth, because I'm like, it just has to be just right. And I got to a point where I finally started like sending it out to like critique partners and everything. And they were like, oh, I can tell you like worked really hard on this. Like, this is really succinct. And I'm like, are you sure? Because no, 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 I used to go back again. And I just spent so much time doing that. I finally had to just sit myself down and go, you know what? You've put together the best story you can. And I started looking at it like every book I come out with will be like my worst book, because the next one's going to be so much better. You're going to learn so much more. And I was like, you know
mm,
what? This is the best I can do right now. I can't beat myself over the head with it. And, then of course, I mean, I got editors and, I went through all of those steps to still truly make it as good as I could. But I was like, okay, at some point you just have to stop. But yeah, it took me a while to get past that point.
yeah, yeah. Well, it's kind of like I think about this as like the only analogy that I could come up with, and I don't know if this is a good one, and I've never gone through this experience. So if people hear this and think I'm crazy, that's fine. But there comes a point where you kind of have to, like, you've invested everything you can into this book, and it's time to let it go and send it off to the editor or send it off, and to me, it almost, I wonder if that's like sending your kid off to college. Like, you've prepared, you've invested, and now it's time. You might not be ready, but now it's time to kind of let this thing go spread its wings and see what like that's kind of
Yeah.
the picture that I get when I think about, like, and I think so many of us are like that, especially with the first book, because that's your first kind of exposure. That's your first getting yourself out there. And so you want it to be perfect. And I think for most of us, we are probably our own harshest critics. And so it's never going to get to that level where we feel like, okay, this is it. But yeah, it's so important to get to that point where you say, okay, I've done all I can do for this one. Let's take the next step in the process and see where it goes. So thanks for sharing that. You mentioned in there critique partners. I think somewhere along the way you talked about, your neighbor writer at a coffee shop as just kind of an illustration. I'm curious, have you been able to connect with other writers who are kind of in progress? And if you don't mind, if the answer is yes, which I think it is, share a little bit about how you connected with those folks. Are there like local groups where you live, or is this people that you found online, or how do you find those connections?
I would say for me, like 99% of it's been online.
Mm-hmm.
And this was like pre-COVID. They stopped it afterwards. And I think some are trying to get it started back up. But libraries near me would have like writer group meetups, and it would be like some of them would be like, okay, bring a chapter and you can get feedback from other people that come to the group. Or, another one would be just more, we're gonna get together and just talk about the craft and, things we like to do, and just kind of more of a writer chat.
Yeah.
Local libraries were, I would say, the only way it was like in person for me. And then everything else was really a lot Instagram. Seeing another author, especially if they were like smaller, I felt like they were kind of like more accessible, you know what I mean? Because, it wasn't like 5 million people bombarding their DMs and everything. And it would just be like, oh, they did a really interesting reel on their book. And I would comment, and we just kind of become friends that way. And they may say, we have like a group chat here. Did you hear about this group? And the more I kind of just talk to people like that, the more I was like, here goes another writer group, and here goes another one. And I have like all these different writer chats now and Facebook groups and all of this. And it just kind of went from, I don't know anyone, to like, now I have all of these writer friends.
Yeah, that's really neat. I think that having a community is so important, for a lot of the reasons I've talked about, like just the encouragement, the accountability, like the knowing that there's someone else who's kind of along the same journey, and maybe people who are a few steps ahead of you who can help you out. Like, I think that's so important. So I'm glad that you were able to find that. I'm curious about now a couple of moments. So I ask a lot of writers, and a lot of times I'm talking to people who are in the process of writing their debut book. So it hasn't been released yet. You're a little different because you've already done that. But one of the things that I like to ask people is like, hey, is there a moment in your journey that you look forward to? And so for some people, that would be like, getting a box of their books in the mail and doing the unboxing. Or for some people, it's seeing their book on the shelf at the local bookstore or whatever. So you've had maybe some of those moments already. So the first part of the question is, have you had any of those big moments where it all became real for you? I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that. And what moments are you looking forward to that haven't happened yet?
Yeah, a few moments where I feel like it became real and then it kind of started all over again. I would say the first one was when I got my first proof copy in the mail. And like it has
Yeah.
a little bar across it, but I would always see these authors do unboxing of like, like going through the proof, like let me check one more time, and they kind of
Yeah.
show themselves like opening it. And I was like, I can't wait till I get to that point. And when I finally did, I just kind of sat there for a moment, like I finally did it, like put this thing together, and I get to physically hold it in my hands. I've waited so long for this. And then one I look forward to that, I guess I kind of already had this. So I wanted to see my book on like a store shelf. And I met somebody through so it was through a writer event that I went to in July. And she just happened to be there, just kind of checking out groups. And she had her own indie bookstore. And I got to see my book like on a store shelf. And I was like, I didn't think this would happen for 10 years. And like, here we are. And next it's going to be a local Barnes and Noble store, and just at a signing there is going to order a few copies for their store. And I was
Oh,
like, oh
cool.
my gosh, should be on the shelf at freaking Barnes and Noble. So that's like my next one. And so that's why I said it kind of already happened. And then my really big one right now is putting out my second book. Like it was a lot to say, okay, like I'm a published author now, but now it just gets me more excited to say, ah, that was my first book. Now I have my second out. So that's, are my next big things.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I was going to ask what's next. So talk a little bit about your next project. Like what is that book all about? Is it connected to the offer? Is it similar or totally different?
No, it's not connected. For now, they'll all be standalones. The next one has more of a stalker trope to it. So
Okay.
it's about a woman that is being stalked, except this stalker is making it seem like she's stalking her friends. So everything that they do to her, she can't prove that it's happening. And then it happens to one of her friends and it appears to be her. And she's like, I'm not lying. It's not me. And
Oh
she
my
has to,
goodness.
for one, prove, okay, this person exists and this is happening. And then two, I'm not the one doing this to you. So that's my next one. I'm so excited for it.
Okay. And do you have a timeline for that one or still a little bit TBD?
I know. So I'm working with a developmental editor that should be wrapped up hopefully in December because they haven't gotten started yet. And I'm hoping around April of 2025, just
Okay.
kind of giving myself room, but I don't have like an official like hard date on it.
Okay, cool. Well, that's exciting. We'll look forward to that. So, a couple more questions and then I'll let you get out of here. The first one is one of the things that I love to share with people and selfishly like I want to know this too. If there are any, what are some of the things that resources that have helped you? So, are there craft books that you've mentioned that a couple times, podcasts, any other resources that you would point to that would say, "Hey, these are my go-to resources when I first started out thinking about how to write and what to write and even maybe the publishing and marketing journey, like any of those resources that you would be willing to share, I think my listeners would love it. So what do you got?
Yeah, okay. I cannot stress this enough. 20 books to 50K. There's a Facebook group and then there is the YouTube channel. Join both. The Facebook group you can go through and people are so transparent like I've never seen. People
Mm,
will post like their, like here's how much I made and here's exactly what I did to make that much and just giving you like the full breakdown. Here's how much I spent on ads and here's my revenue. And just so that you can get insight as to like what it looks like at different levels, and you'll see people that are like, hey, I made my first $10, I made my first $1,000, and here's how I got there. And it's everything from how they're doing ads to how they're doing like in-person events, or just everything you want to know, from how do you get started to I'm doing really well, what next. And then on their YouTube page they have events like in person every year, and
mhm,
they'll, about a week or a couple weeks after that event, they'll post like all of those sessions on the YouTube. All of these amazing resources from authors that are making millions a year, people that are indie, people that are trad. It's mostly indie, but there's a mix in there. It's such a wealth of resources. It costs you absolutely nothing. I would say to anyone and everyone who writes to write, like, go join. It helps so much.
cool. Thank you. That's great. I'll definitely include that in the show notes. That's awesome. Okay. What is your favorite book and what makes it so good?
My favorite book is The Couple Next Door by Shari Lapina.
Okay.
And it's one of those things where it's like, so like it's I don't know, if anyone listening to this has heard of it, but basically it's about this couple that wants to go to their next door neighbor's dinner. They're having like this special dinner night and they're like, oh, we really want to get out the house. We just had a new baby. Except their friends next door are like, we don't want you to bring your baby. So they're
Oh,
like, okay, we're going to leave her at home alone in her crib sleeping. And, we have monitors and all this. It'll be fine. And we'll go check on her every so often. Except at the end of the night when they go, their baby's missing.
oh wow.
And it's, them trying to figure out, like, oh, what happened? Where's the kid? And this whole thing just kind of unravels. And it's so well told. And I mean, for one, it's like you look at the synopsis and you're like, well, who would do that and why? But then you're reading it and you're like, okay, I kind of get it, even if I don't agree. And then so much happens. Like I can't really explain it because I don't want to give, spoilers away.
Yeah, no
But
spoilers.
yeah, but just it's so incredibly good. And it's one of those things that from the beginning I'm like, well, this is odd. Why would someone do this? And it's such a page turner. And I love all of Shari Lapina's books, but that one is just above all else my favorite.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, it sounds intense. Okay, very cool. So Carmen, I think for a lot of people, like one of the dreams that might be like something they'd love to realize if there's writers out there is the idea of like seeing their book in a Barnes and Noble. So how did that happen for you? Like talk a little bit about, because that seems like a hurdle for a lot of people that maybe they can never get to, or maybe at least people think that. I'm curious, how did you make that happen?
So when I was coming out with the offer last year, I told myself I'm definitely going to do it. Initially, I wanted to put out like 3 books. I was like, that was insane. I am not prepared for that. But there was an event that was happening in Texas and I signed up for it before I was fully ready with the book. And I said, I'm going to make sure I can attend this event with my book in hand, and that pushed me to do it. And I was like, I'm just going to start putting myself out there. No more letting imposter syndrome beat me down. No more stressing or worrying because I did so much comparing myself. People at this event are going to have like 50 books out and I'm just going to have this one and nobody wants to see me. They don't know who I am yet. And I just went there and did it. So I get to the event and my sister and my husband came with me. And I was like, man, it'd be really easy for me to only talk to people if they came to my table and just to kind of sit back and talk to the people that I know. And I was like, no, like I'm doing this. I'm going to just at least introduce myself and walk around. And I started doing that. And one lady that I was talking to at somebody else's table came to mine, and she was a rep for a Barnes and Noble. And she's just looking at my book. And of course I'm sitting there freaking out because I'm like, oh my God, Barnes and Noble, you're looking at my book. And she was like, I really like this. Would you want to have maybe a couple copies in our store? And I was like, of course. And so I reached out. She was like, here's where you email me. And I did that. And then they were like, also, do you want to do a signing? We have like some time open on these dates. And after I did my like very awkward happy dance, I wrote back and said, of course. And my point is just like from that day though, just the connections that I made and people that I talked to. Barnes and Noble was the one that just happened, but I also talked to a rep at the flagship store of Half Price Books in Dallas, and I'm going to get to do an event there next year. I did the event on Barnes and Noble, and they were, I think part of it too is looking at how you present yourself and just being pleasant and easy to work with. And
Yeah.
It doesn't mean, issues won't arise, but you know what I mean? Just kind of being like just a genuinely like decent person to be around. And they were like, oh, this went great. Come back again next year. So now that's like 2 major stores that my books will be in and that I get to sell at. So many other opportunities came up when I just decided that, you know what, even if I'm not Colleen Hoover, right? I'm just going to put myself out there. I've written the best book I could. And that is like a big thing I would say to anyone. Before this, I would have thought, oh, it'd be 10, 15 years, if I can publish like rapid speed before this would happen. But really, you just never know when it's going to go. So just put yourself out there and don't be afraid.
I love it. I love it. Thanks so much for sharing that. That's great. I think we're basically at the end. I don't have any other questions except for one more. And this one's an easy one. How do people get in touch with you? How do people buy your book? How do people follow you? Give me your, website, social media, all the links. How do people get in touch?
Yes. So TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, all of them are at author Carmen Norris. And then if you want to sign up for like my email, it's authorcarmennorris.mailerpage.io. That's very long. So if you just follow me on like Instagram or TikTok, the link's in there. And I will look forward to talking to everyone that reaches out.
Awesome. Well, Carmen, this has been so great. Thank you so much for joining the podcast. It's been awesome talking with you. And I can't wait to hear more about your next book. So thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to today's episode. If you would do me a huge favor, if you got value out of this podcast, which I'm assuming maybe you did since you're still here, would you scroll down to the bottom of your podcast app and rate and review the show? and maybe share it with someone on social media or with a friend just in a conversation. It would mean so much to get this message out to more people, and I think it would be amazing if you would share it. So that would be, as a personal favor to me, I'd really love it. Also, if you want to know more about me and what I'm working on, you can visit my website. It's tcburr.com. I hope you'll check it out. You can contact me there. Thanks again, and I really appreciate it. I'll talk to you soon.